At 58 years old, Linda Harper lost the only career she had ever known, walking out of the office after more than 3 decades with nothing but a cardboard box and the painful realization that she had been laid off just months before qualifying for better retirement benefits. Then she made a decision that everyone around her thought was completely foolish. Rather than selling the old desert gas station a distant uncle had unexpectedly left her, she packed her belongings and moved into the rundown property in the middle of nowhere, convinced there had to be a reason he had chosen her. Friends told her she was wasting her last chance to rebuild her life. Neighbors quietly wondered why anyone would keep a place that looked ready to collapse. And even her own daughter initially believed selling it was the only sensible choice. But while clearing out a forgotten storage room, Linda noticed something that shouldn't have existed beneath the cracked concrete floor. A heavy steel hatch sealed shut for nearly 40 years, and when she finally found the key and opened what had been hidden underneath, she uncovered something far more valuable than money. But before I reveal what was waiting inside that locked underground room, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is in your part of the world. I always love seeing how far these stories travel. If it's morning where you are, I hope you have a wonderful day filled with peace, good health, and unexpected blessings. And if you enjoy emotional stories about hidden legacies, family secrets, and second chances, leave a comment below, subscribe to the channel, and let's uncover this unforgettable mystery together. Linda Harper stared at the cardboard box on her desk, wondering how 32 years of loyal work could be reduced to a framed photograph, a coffee mug, 2 accounting textbooks, and a small cactus that somehow had survived every office move. Only an hour earlier, she had believed she was finishing another ordinary Thursday. Instead, she had been called into a conference room where a human resources manager and a supervisor she barely knew explained that the company was restructuring. Her position had been eliminated. They thanked her for decades of dedication, handed her a folder containing severance documents, and politely escorted her back to collect her belongings. The hardest part was not losing the paycheck. It was hearing that the layoff came only 6 months before she would have qualified for enhanced retirement benefits. Linda had asked whether there was any way to remain until then. The answer had been a practiced apology followed by silence. Now she carried the box through the parking lot beneath the hot Arizona sun, while coworkers avoided making eye contact, unsure what to say. She unlocked her aging sedan, carefully placed the box on the passenger seat, and sat behind the wheel without starting the engine. For the first time since her divorce years earlier, she felt truly uncertain about the future. At 58, she knew finding another accounting job would not be easy. Experience had once been an advantage. Lately, it seemed to make employers see only her age. She drove home in silence. Her modest house felt unusually empty as she placed the box on the kitchen table and slowly unpacked its contents. The framed photograph showed her younger self, standing beside coworkers during the company's 20th anniversary celebration. Most of the people in the picture had already retired or moved away. She wondered if anyone would remember her desk being empty next week. Before she could think any further, her phone rang. The screen displayed her daughter Mia's name. Linda answered with a smile she did not feel. "Hi, sweetheart." "Mom, how did the meeting go?" Linda hesitated only briefly. "I don't work there anymore." A long silence followed. "They actually did it?" Mia asked softly. "They did. I'm coming over." "You don't have to. I'm already grabbing my keys." Less than 30 minutes later, Mia let herself into the house carrying 2 cups of coffee from her mother's favorite cafe. She hugged Linda without saying anything at first. The embrace lasted longer than either of them expected. Finally, Mia stepped back. "I'm so sorry." Linda managed a tired smile. "I always thought I'd leave that office because I was ready. not because someone else decided I was finished. They spent the afternoon reviewing household expenses, savings, and the severance package. Linda had been careful with money all her life, but even careful planning had limits. "You'll find something," Mia said encouragingly. Linda appreciated the optimism, though she knew the job market had become difficult even for younger applicants. During the following 2 weeks, she updated her resume, submitted applications, and attended several interviews. Every conversation ended politely. Some employers praised her qualifications before explaining they had chosen someone who better matched the company's future direction. Others promised to keep her resume on file. No offers came. One afternoon, after receiving another rejection email, Linda closed her laptop and stared out the living room window. She had spent decades balancing accounts, solving financial problems, and helping businesses stay organized. Now she could not convince anyone she was worth hiring. Just as discouragement threatened to settle in, the phone rang again. The unfamiliar number displayed an area code she did not recognize. "Linda Harper?" a calm voice asked after she answered. "Speaking." "My name is Daniel Price. I'm an attorney representing the estate of your great-uncle Robert Harper." Linda frowned slightly. Uncle Robert? She had not seen him since childhood. He had lived alone somewhere in northern Arizona and rarely visited family gatherings. "I'm sorry to tell you that he recently passed away," Daniel said gently. Linda felt an unexpected sadness. Though distant, Robert had always been kind during the few summers she remembered visiting him. "Thank you for letting me know." "There's another reason I'm calling. Your uncle named you as the primary beneficiary in his will." Linda blinked in surprise. "There must be some mistake." "There isn't," Daniel continued. "He left you his property, including an old gas station located outside the small desert community of Dry Mesa." Linda looked around her quiet kitchen, trying to understand what she had just heard. "A gas station?" "Yes. I'll explain everything when we meet, but ownership transfers directly to you if you choose to accept the inheritance." After arranging an appointment for the following week, Daniel ended the call. Linda remained seated, staring at the silent phone in her hand. She had barely spoken to Uncle Robert in 40 years. Why would he leave her anything, let alone an entire property? A week later, she followed a lonely highway stretching across the Arizona desert until a faded roadside sign appeared in the distance. Beyond it stood a weathered gas station surrounded by open land, its aging fuel pumps facing the endless road as if they had been patiently waiting for someone to return. Daniel Price was already waiting outside the weathered building when Linda pulled into the gravel lot. He greeted her with a warm handshake before unlocking the faded front door with an old brass key. "I'm sorry we had to meet under these circumstances," he said. Linda nodded. "I still can't believe Uncle Robert left this to me." Daniel smiled gently. "Neither could I when I first read the will." Inside, the small gas station looked as though time had simply slowed down instead of stopping. Dust covered the shelves, an old cash register sat behind the counter, and faded postcards advertising Arizona landmarks still hung near the entrance. A wall clock had frozen years earlier, yet everything remained carefully organized. Nothing appeared abandoned in haste. It felt as though Robert had expected to return at any moment. Daniel handed Linda a worn envelope containing several keys. "These are yours now. The deed has already been transferred into your name." Linda turned the heavy keys in her hand. "Did he leave any explanation?" "Only a brief note." Daniel unfolded a single sheet of paper written in Robert's neat handwriting. "Linda has always been honest. She'll know what to do when the time comes." That was all. No further instructions, no explanation of why she had been chosen over closer relatives. Linda folded the note carefully and slipped it into her purse. Together they walked through the building, The small office still contained ledgers, receipts, and neatly labeled filing cabinets. A modest apartment in the back held simple furniture, books, and family photographs. Linda stopped when she recognized one of the pictures. She was only 8 years old, sitting on the hood of an old pickup truck beside Robert during a summer visit she had nearly forgotten. He had been smiling broadly while handing her an ice cream cone. She remembered now that he had taught her how to check the oil in a truck before laughing when she insisted on writing every step down in a notebook. "He kept this all these years?" she whispered. Daniel noticed the photograph. He didn't throw much away. After Daniel left to return to town, Linda remained alone at the station. She unlocked every cabinet and slowly explored each room, trying to imagine Robert's daily life in the quiet desert. The place clearly needed work. Paint peeled from the walls, the roof leaked in one corner of the storage room, several windows required replacement, and the old fuel pumps had long since stopped operating. Selling the property would almost certainly be easier than restoring it. Still, something about the station made her reluctant to rush the decision. Late that afternoon, the sound of an approaching pickup truck interrupted her thoughts. A man in his mid-30s stepped out carrying a toolbox. "You must be Linda," he called with a friendly smile. "I'm Jake Morales." Linda introduced herself. "Daniel mentioned you might stop by." Jake nodded. "I've helped around this place for years whenever Robert needed an extra pair of hands." He looked toward the old building with quiet affection. "Thought I'd see if you needed anything." Linda accepted his offer to inspect the property. Together, they walked around the station while Jake pointed out practical concerns. "The roof can be repaired," he said. "The electrical wiring will need updating. The workshop out back is still solid." He kicked lightly at one of the old fuel pumps. "These won't be cheap to replace, though." Linda sighed. "Sounds expensive." "It could be," Jake smiled, "but the bones of the place are good." They continued around the back of the building until they reached the storage shed. Jake examined the concrete floor before commenting that someone had repaired sections of it many years earlier. "Robert did a lot of work himself," Linda said. "Maybe—" Jake knelt briefly, running his hand across a faint seam in the concrete. "Or maybe he covered something." Before Linda could ask what he meant, another truck slowly pulled into the lot. An elderly man stepped out, leaning comfortably against the driver's door before walking over. "Afternoon," he said. "Name's Frank Dawson. I lived down the road from Robert for nearly 40 years. Linda shook his hand warmly. Frank looked around the quiet station with a nostalgic smile. "Strange seeing someone else here." They spoke for several minutes about Robert's quiet life. Frank described him as dependable, private, and always willing to help stranded travelers without expecting anything in return. Before leaving, Frank paused beside the old office window. "Your uncle had one habit nobody ever understood." Linda looked at him curiously. "What was that?" "He never trusted banks." Jake laughed softly. "Still kept his money under the mattress." Frank shook his head. "No." Robert believed some things were too important to leave where other people could reach them. Linda frowned thoughtfully. "Did he ever say what he meant?" "Not exactly." Frank glanced toward the back storage room. "Just that if something truly mattered, it belonged close enough to protect with your own hands." With that, Frank tipped his hat, climbed back into his truck, and drove away. As the evening sun settled lower over the desert, Linda and Jake returned to the storage building. Jake looked once more at the unusual seam running through the concrete floor. He crouched again, brushing away years of dust with his glove. The line became slightly more visible, stretching in a rough rectangle beneath a stack of forgotten shelves. Linda stared at the repaired section in silence. Whatever Robert had chosen to hide there, he had gone to considerable effort to make sure no one noticed it. Linda stood silently in the storage room, studying the faint rectangular outline beneath the dusty concrete floor. Jake remained crouched beside it, brushing away another layer of dirt with the edge of a putty knife. The repaired section became easier to see as the dust disappeared. "Someone cut this open years ago," he said, "then sealed it back up." Linda folded her arms. "Could it just be an old utility access?" Jake shook his head. "Maybe, but I've worked on enough buildings to know this wasn't a normal repair." She looked around the quiet room. Part of her wanted to forget about the mysterious patch altogether. She had only come to inspect a property she expected to sell. Every extra discovery seemed to pull her further away from the simple plan she had made after losing her job. Selling the station would solve immediate financial worries. Digging into forgotten mysteries would not. Jake seemed to sense her hesitation. "You don't have to decide today," he said. "Whatever's under there has waited a long time already." Linda smiled faintly. "That's probably the most practical thing anyone has said to me all week." They spent the rest of the afternoon clearing the storage room instead of disturbing the floor. Old shelves, rusted tools, empty oil drums, and broken wooden crates filled the space. Robert had apparently saved almost everything. Some items clearly belonged in the trash, while others looked surprisingly well maintained despite their age. Linda carefully sorted through boxes stacked against one wall. Most contained receipts, spare parts, and maintenance records written in Robert's neat handwriting. His habit of keeping detailed notes reminded her of her own years as an accountant. Every repair, purchase, and inspection had been dated and organized with remarkable precision. "He was thorough," Jake observed as Linda stacked another folder. "I noticed," she smiled, "I think we would have gotten along better as adults than we ever did when I was a kid." As evening approached, Linda unlocked the small office again to continue organizing paperwork. She opened desk drawers one by one, expecting little more than old invoices and office supplies. Instead, inside the bottom drawer she discovered a small wooden box tucked behind several ledgers. It contained family photographs, a pocket watch that no longer worked, and a single brass key attached to a faded leather tag. There was no label. The key looked old, heavier than an ordinary door key, with an unusually long shaft and worn teeth polished by years of use. Linda turned it over in her hand. "Jake," he stepped into the office. "Find something?" She held up the key. "Any idea what this opens?" Jake examined it briefly before shaking his head. "Definitely not a modern lock." Linda searched the rest of the drawer, but found nothing explaining its purpose. She slipped the key into her pocket. "Guess we'll keep looking." The next morning they returned to the storage room. Jake measured the rectangular outline in the floor while Linda compared it to the building plans Daniel had included with the property documents. The drawings showed no utility room beneath the shed and no mention of underground storage. "According to this," she said, "there shouldn't be anything here." Jake tapped lightly along the concrete with a rubber mallet. Most of the floor produced a solid sound, but the repaired section echoed differently. Hollow. He looked up. "There's space underneath." Linda felt a mixture of curiosity and nervousness. "If we open it, we could damage something, not if we're careful." They spent the next hour removing shelves and sweeping away decades of accumulated dust. Once the floor was completely exposed, Jake noticed a small metal plate nearly hidden beneath a thin layer of concrete patching near one corner. Using a scraper, he carefully chipped away just enough material to reveal the edge of rusted steel. "This wasn't just repaired," he said quietly. "It was hidden." Linda knelt beside him. The steel plate contained a circular keyhole, almost completely concealed beneath hardened sealant. Her heartbeat quickened. She reached into her pocket and slowly removed the brass key from Robert's desk. Neither of them spoke. Jake nodded toward the lock. Only one way to find out. Linda carefully inserted the key. At first, it refused to move. She eased it back, brushed away more dust from the lock, and tried again. This time, the key slid fully into place. She turned it gently. Nothing happened. Jake placed one hand against the steel plate. Try a little more pressure. Linda tightened her grip and slowly twisted the key. A deep metallic click echoed beneath the concrete. Both of them froze. After decades of silence, the old locking mechanism had finally released. Jake found a recessed metal handle hidden along the edge of the plate. Together they pulled upward. The heavy steel hatch resisted for a moment before rising with a long groan of rusted hinges. A rush of cool, stale air drifted out from the darkness below. Linda stepped closer, holding a flashlight over the opening. Narrow concrete stairs disappeared into an underground room untouched by daylight for decades. She looked at Jake, then back into the darkness, realizing they had just opened a place that no one else had entered for more than 40 years. Linda held the flashlight over the open hatch, while the cool air drifting from below carried the dry scent of paper, concrete, and decades of stillness. She had expected the hidden room to contain old machinery, forgotten fuel tanks, or perhaps a few boxes of family belongings. Instead, all she could see at first was the narrow staircase disappearing into darkness. Jake picked up another flashlight from his toolbox and looked at her. "Ready?" Linda took a slow breath before nodding. They descended carefully, each step echoing softly against the concrete walls. At the bottom, Jake found an old electrical switch mounted beside the doorway. He flipped it out of curiosity. To their surprise, several ceiling lights flickered weakly before glowing to life, one by one. Though dim with age, they illuminated the entire room. Linda stopped in astonishment. There was no hidden fortune waiting beneath the gas station. No stacks of cash, no gold bars, no forgotten antiques. Instead, heavy metal shelving stretched across the underground room from wall to wall. Hundreds of carefully labeled archive boxes sat in perfect rows, protected from dust and moisture. Each shelf had been arranged with remarkable precision. "Your uncle wasn't hiding treasure," Jake murmured. "He was protecting something." Linda slowly walked toward the nearest shelf. Every box carried handwritten labels with dates, property numbers, or family names. Some were marked by county sections, while others contained references she did not immediately understand. She opened one box carefully. Inside lay neatly organized folders filled with maps, survey drawings, deeds, legal correspondence, and handwritten notes. The paper had yellowed with age but remained in excellent condition thanks to the cool, dry environment. Linda gently unfolded one large map across a nearby table. It showed parcels of desert land surrounding Dry Mesa, marked with boundaries, ownership records, and water access points dating back decades. "These aren't personal papers," she said quietly. Jake looked over her shoulder. "They look official." Linda nodded. Years of reviewing financial documents had trained her to recognize organized records immediately. Very official. They continued examining the room. Several shelves contained county survey maps. Others held handwritten ledgers listing land transfers and water rights. One cabinet stored rolled blueprints tied neatly with faded cloth ribbons. Another contained correspondence between attorneys, surveyors, and local officials. Every document appeared carefully preserved rather than simply stored. "Robert must have spent years organizing this," Jake observed. Linda looked around the room with growing respect. Nothing here happened by accident. They spent the next hour opening only enough boxes to understand the general contents without disturbing the careful filing system. The deeper they explored, the more one fact became obvious. Robert had invested extraordinary effort into protecting records that most people would have considered ordinary paperwork. Yet someone had gone to equal effort to build a hidden underground archive beneath an isolated gas station. Jake frowned thoughtfully. If these belonged in a courthouse or bank, why keep them here? Linda had no answer. The question became even more puzzling as she noticed many documents carried official seals and original signatures rather than simple copies. They looked like primary records, not duplicates. Near the back of the room stood a long steel cabinet with several drawers labeled by decade. Linda carefully opened one drawer and found more property files sorted alphabetically by family name. Some names seemed familiar from road signs and nearby ranches she had passed while driving through the area. Others meant nothing to her. She closed the drawer gently. People are probably still living on some of this land. Jake nodded. Maybe. He paused before adding, whatever this is, you should probably let Daniel see it before moving anything. Linda agreed immediately. The documents were clearly legal in nature, and she wanted professional advice before making assumptions about their significance. As they prepared to leave, Linda noticed a smaller wooden crate sitting alone on the lowest shelf, unlike the neatly labeled archive boxes surrounding it. This one had only 4 words written across the lid in thick black marker: "Do not destroy." She stared at the message for several seconds before kneeling beside the crate. Jake crouched next to her. "Think we should open it?" Linda rested one hand lightly on the weathered wood. Every instinct told her that Robert had chosen those words with care. Whatever lay inside had mattered enough for him to single it out from hundreds of other records. She slowly lifted the metal latch and raised the lid just enough to see the first folder resting on top. The cover carried another handwritten note in Robert's familiar handwriting. It read simply, "Read this first." Linda carefully lifted the folder from the crate and carried it to the sturdy table in the center of the underground room. Jake stood quietly beside her while she unfolded the first page. Instead of a personal letter, she found a typed inventory describing the contents of the hidden archive. Robert had organized the records into categories that included land deeds, property surveys, water rights, legal correspondence, and original county filings. A handwritten note filled the bottom margin. "These documents belong to the truth, not to me." Linda read the sentence twice before placing the page aside. The remaining folders contained detailed indexes that matched the shelves surrounding them. Everything had been cataloged with remarkable care. Robert had created cross-references, maps, and handwritten notes explaining where related files could be found. "He built an archive," Jake said quietly, "not a hiding place." Linda nodded. "And he expected someone to understand it someday." They resisted the temptation to search randomly through the room. Instead, Linda used the index to locate several sample files from different sections. One contained the original survey for a ranch established decades earlier. Another included signed agreements concerning water access across neighboring properties. A third held legal correspondence discussing boundary adjustments that had never appeared on later maps. The deeper they looked, the clearer it became that Robert had preserved original documents rather than ordinary copies. Linda recognized embossed county seals, notarized signatures, and recording stamps. These were the kinds of papers attorneys relied upon when ownership questions reached court. "Daniel needs to see this," she said. Jake agreed immediately. By late afternoon, Daniel Price arrived at the gas station, after Linda explained only that she had discovered important records beneath the property. When he climbed down the underground stairs and saw the shelves stretching into the distance, he stopped speaking altogether. "Good heavens," he whispered. Linda handed him several sample files without comment. Daniel adjusted his glasses and slowly reviewed the contents. His expression changed from curiosity to astonishment. "These are authentic," he said at last. Original filings. He carefully examined another folder before looking back at Linda. Do you realize what you found? She shook her head. Only that it seems important. Daniel nodded slowly. It's much more than important. He explained that original land records often carried legal significance when ownership disputes arose or historical filings required verification. Losing such records could affect generations of property rights. Your uncle protected documents that many people probably assumed no longer existed. Linda looked around the room once more. Why would he keep them here? Daniel closed one folder thoughtfully. I don't know yet. Over the next several hours, they reviewed additional files together. Many appeared complete and carefully preserved. Others contained Robert's handwritten observations, comparing official records with later revisions. Daniel became increasingly impressed by the precision of Robert's work. He documented everything, he said. Whoever organized this understood legal records extremely well. As evening approached, Daniel paused over a thick folder containing several incomplete filing forms. He compared the documents inside with another set of county records before frowning. That's unusual. Linda looked up. What is? Daniel spread the papers across the table. These deeds were prepared correctly, signed correctly, and supported by surveys. He tapped one page gently. But according to these notes, they were never officially recorded. What does that mean? Legally, paperwork like this can remain in limbo. Ownership questions may never have been fully resolved. Linda studied the names listed on the pages. Some belonged to families still living around Dry Mesa. Others matched names she had seen while exploring the archive earlier that day. So people might never have received what they were entitled to? Daniel answered carefully. It's possible. They decided not to draw conclusions until every file had been reviewed properly. But the discovery changed the atmosphere in the room. The archive no longer appeared to be merely a collection of historical records. It hinted at unfinished legal matters that had remained untouched for decades. The following morning, Linda visited Evelyn Brooks, the retired postmaster Daniel had suggested she meet. Evelyn had known Robert for many years and welcomed Linda warmly into her small adobe home overlooking the desert. After hearing about the hidden room, Evelyn smiled with quiet affection. That sounds exactly like Robert. Linda asked what she meant. Evelyn poured tea before answering. Your uncle believed paper could protect people just as surely as walls could. She remembered Robert spending countless evenings sorting documents after the post office closed. He always said that someday someone honest would finish what he couldn't. Linda looked down at her teacup. I don't understand why he chose me. Evelyn smiled gently. Maybe because honesty was the one thing he never doubted about you. When Linda returned to the underground archive later that afternoon, Daniel was still reviewing files at the large table. He looked up as she entered, holding one folder open in his hands. Linda, he said quietly, I think I found something much bigger than missing paperwork. He turned the document toward her. Several original property records carried every required signature and seal, yet none showed evidence of ever being officially entered into the county registry. The discovery of the unrecorded documents changed the way Linda looked at every shelf in the underground room. What at first appeared to be a carefully preserved archive now seemed like the unfinished work of a man who had spent decades protecting something larger than himself. The following morning, she returned with fresh notebooks, determined to create an inventory before moving another file. Her years as an accountant made the task feel familiar. Every box received a number. Every folder was logged by date, location, and subject. Jake helped carry boxes to the large table one at a time, while Daniel compared selected documents with copies available through the county registry. By midday, a clear pattern had emerged. Many of the original records matched official files perfectly. Those did not. In several cases, original deeds, survey maps, and water right agreements existed underground while the public record remained incomplete. Daniel leaned back in his chair. Your uncle wasn't collecting paperwork for the sake of history. Linda looked up from her notes. He was protecting it. Daniel nodded. That's exactly what it looks like. Linda thought about Robert's handwritten message. These documents belong to the truth, not to me. The sentence carried far more weight now than it had the day before. She had inherited more than an old gas station. She had inherited a responsibility she still barely understood. That afternoon, Frank Dawson stopped by after hearing that Linda had been spending long days inside the station. Jake invited him into the office, and before long, the three of them were sitting around the old wooden desk. Frank smiled sadly as he looked around the familiar room. Robert spent countless evenings right there, he said, pointing toward the desk. Stacks of papers everywhere. Linda asked quietly, Did he ever tell you what he was working on? Frank shook his head. Not directly. He'd say, some folks inherit money. Others inherit promises. He chuckled softly. I never understood what he meant. Did he ever mention the room beneath the storage building? Frank looked genuinely surprised. So you found it? Linda nodded. Frank rested both hands on his cane before speaking again. I knew there was something under there, but Robert never showed it to me. He only asked me one favor. What was that? If anything ever happened to him, make sure nobody tore the building down before family arrived. Linda felt a lump rise in her throat. Robert had planned farther ahead than anyone realized. He trusted you, she said. Frank smiled. I think he was waiting for someone else. After Frank left, Linda returned to the underground room with a deeper appreciation for the quiet life her uncle had lived. He had carried an enormous responsibility without asking anyone to praise him for it. The more she learned, the harder it became to imagine simply selling the property and walking away. As evening approached, Jake discovered a narrow wooden drawer built into one of the shelving units near the back wall. Inside lay a weathered leather journal tied with faded twine. Linda carefully untied the string and opened the first page. The handwriting belonged to Robert. Unlike the organized legal files, the journal contained personal entries. Robert described traveling across the county to verify old property boundaries, meeting families who believed paperwork had disappeared forever, and spending years comparing conflicting records. He never accused anyone of wrongdoing. Instead, he wrote patiently about preserving evidence until every fact could be verified properly. Linda turned another page. Robert had recorded dates, names, and reminders to cross-reference documents stored elsewhere in the archive. Occasionally, he added personal reflections. One sentence made Linda pause. Truth takes longer than convenience, but it lasts longer too. She smiled sadly. It sounded exactly like the man Evelyn had described. Daniel read several entries over her shoulder. This journal explains why he kept working, he said. He believed someone would eventually finish it. They continued reading until one section abruptly changed. Robert listed several files that should have been stored together, then added a short note in the margin. Original records relocated for additional protection. Linda immediately checked the nearby shelves. The referenced folders were missing. Daniel searched the inventory while Jake examined surrounding cabinets. None of the listed documents could be found. These must be the missing records, Daniel said quietly. Linda closed the journal. If Robert moved them, he must have left another clue. She slowly turned the remaining pages until a folded sheet slipped free and landed on the table. It was a hand-drawn sketch of the gas station property. Most of it matched the buildings above, but one corner contained a carefully marked symbol beside a handwritten note. Safe location. Linda looked at Jake and Daniel. The missing records had not vanished at all. Robert had hidden them somewhere else, and he had left behind a map showing where to begin looking. Linda spread Robert's hand-drawn map across the table, while Jake and Daniel studied the small symbol marked Safe Location. It pointed toward the rear corner of the old workshop attached to the gas station, an area filled with dusty shelves and long-forgotten equipment. They returned upstairs, carrying flashlights, and carefully measured the location against the sketch. The marked spot led them to a heavy steel workbench that appeared not to have been moved in decades. Together they cleared away old tools, rusty cans of bolts, and wooden crates before slowly sliding the bench aside. Beneath it, a square steel safe was built directly into the concrete floor. Unlike the hidden hatch leading to the underground archive, this safe had never been concealed with fresh concrete. It had simply been hidden beneath years of ordinary clutter. Robert expected someone with the map to find it, Jake said quietly. Linda knelt beside the safe. A small envelope rested on top, protected inside a waterproof sleeve. Written across the front in Robert's familiar handwriting were the words, "For Linda." She opened it carefully. Inside was a brief letter. "If you're reading this, you've already found the room below. That means you stayed long enough to ask why instead of selling everything. Thank you. The papers inside this safe matter because they are originals. They belong to families, not to me. If you are willing, finish what I could not." Linda lowered the letter, her eyes filling with emotion. She barely remembered her great-uncle from childhood. Yet somehow he had trusted her with the most important responsibility of his life. Jake rested a gentle hand on her shoulder. "He believed in you." She nodded quietly. Daniel examined the safe. "Let's see what he protected." The combination had been written inside the letter. After several careful turns of the dial, the lock released with a soft click. The heavy door swung open to reveal neatly stacked waterproof document cases. Inside lay dozens of original property deeds, survey certificates, notarized water right agreements, and signed legal affidavits preserved in perfect condition. Daniel lifted the first folder with obvious care. "These are exactly what we've been missing." He compared one original deed with the incomplete file from the underground archive. The signatures matched perfectly. Every supporting survey and legal attachment was present. "Without these," he explained, "some ownership claims could never have been fully verified. With them—" He paused, looking directly at Linda. "These records still have legal value." Linda felt a mixture of relief and responsibility. Robert had not hidden riches beneath the desert. He had protected evidence capable of restoring rights that had remained uncertain for decades. As they carefully returned the documents to the safe for temporary protection, another thought crossed Linda's mind. "If these belong to families," she said, "then they need to go back." Daniel nodded. "Yes, but properly. We'll need to verify every record through the legal process." Later that evening, Linda called Mia and invited her to visit the gas station. Her daughter arrived the following afternoon expecting to see an old building in need of repairs. Instead, she found her mother surrounded by maps, legal files, and inventory lists spread across the office desk. After listening to the entire story, Mia remained silent for a long moment. "I thought you were going to sell this place," she admitted. Linda smiled gently. "So did I." Mia looked toward the workshop where Jake was organizing additional boxes. "Now I understand why you haven't." Linda handed her Robert's letter. Mia read it slowly before looking up. "He trusted you because he knew you'd do the right thing." "I hope so." Mia folded the letter carefully. "You're not doing this alone anymore." Linda felt a warmth she had not experienced since before losing her job. "Does that mean you're staying for a while?" Mia smiled. "As long as you need me." Over the next several days, mother and daughter worked side by side organizing files while Jake repaired damaged shelving in the underground archive. Daniel continued reviewing the records, one section at a time. His confidence grew with every completed comparison. "I've confirmed enough to say this without hesitation," he told them one afternoon. "These original documents remain legally valid. Properly submitted, they can support formal reviews of ownership records and water right claims." Linda looked across the shelves Robert had spent years protecting. The work ahead would be enormous. But for the first time, she no longer felt overwhelmed. She felt purposeful. As sunset painted the desert in shades of orange and gold, she placed Robert's letter back inside its envelope and quietly thanked him for believing that one day someone would finish what he had started. With Daniel's guidance, Linda began the careful process of contacting the families whose names appeared in the original records. She refused to rush. Every document was checked against county files before a single phone call was made. Mia helped organize contact information, while Jake continued improving the old gas station so visitors would have a clean, comfortable place to meet. The building that Linda had once planned to sell slowly became a busy workspace filled with maps, file boxes, and conversations about history, property lines, and long-forgotten agreements. The first family to visit arrived on a warm Tuesday morning. An elderly rancher and his daughter walked into the office after receiving Linda's letter explaining that she might possess original documents connected to their land. Daniel carefully presented copies while keeping the originals safely stored below. The rancher adjusted his glasses as he studied the paperwork. His hands trembled slightly. "My father spent years saying these papers existed," he whispered. Nobody believed him. Linda quietly slid another survey across the desk. "Your uncle kept every supporting document together." The man looked up with tears in his eyes. "You have no idea what this means to my family." Linda smiled gently. "I'm beginning to understand." Over the following weeks, more families visited the station. Some arrived cautiously, uncertain whether the letters were genuine. Others came carrying faded copies of old deeds, hoping they might finally learn what had happened decades earlier. Each meeting followed the same careful process. Daniel verified identities, compared records, and explained the legal steps required before any changes could be recognized officially. Linda never made promises she could not guarantee. Instead, she offered people something many had stopped expecting long ago: evidence. One afternoon, a middle-aged woman quietly hugged Linda after receiving copies of documents proving her late grandfather had once held recorded water rights that had never been fully processed. "He always said the paperwork disappeared," she said. "Now I know he was telling the truth." Moments like that reminded Linda why Robert had spent so many years protecting the archive. The records represented far more than legal files. They preserved the stories of families who had waited decades to be heard. As word spread through Dry Mesa and neighboring communities, people began stopping by simply to thank Linda for continuing Robert's work. Evelyn visited often, bringing homemade cookies and stories about the early days of the town. Frank volunteered to help organize storage shelves. Jake repaired broken cabinets without accepting payment. The old gas station slowly became a gathering place once again. One evening, Mia looked around the busy office and smiled. "You know," she said, "I've never seen this building feel so alive." Linda laughed softly. "Neither have I." The work, however, remained far from complete. Every file required careful review before anything could be submitted through official channels. Daniel spent long hours preparing documentation for county officials, making certain every claim rested on verifiable evidence rather than assumption. "Accuracy matters more than speed," he reminded everyone. Linda agreed completely. After spending her career balancing financial records, she understood that trust depended upon precision. Several weeks later, Daniel received encouraging news. The county office had agreed to conduct a formal review of the recovered original records. Rather than dismissing the discovery, first recognized the significance of the preserved documents and scheduled a comprehensive examination of the affected property and water right files. Linda read the letter twice before smiling with quiet relief. They'll actually review everything. Daniel nodded. This is exactly what Robert hoped would happen someday. The announcement brought renewed optimism throughout the community. Families who had nearly given up believing the truth could ever be documented now saw a legitimate path forward. Jake hung a fresh bulletin board inside the station where updates about the review process could be posted for everyone to read. Mia organized appointment schedules so families could bring additional records if needed. The gas station no longer felt forgotten. It had become a place where people came searching for answers. One afternoon, after the last visitors had gone home, Linda walked alone into the underground archive. She paused beside the shelves Robert had built with such care. Every box now represented faces she had met and stories she had heard. She rested her hand lightly on one of the labeled cartons. "You knew this day would come," she whispered, as she turned to leave. Daniel appeared at the bottom of the stairs, carrying another envelope from the county office. He smiled before handing it to her. "The review board has accepted the first group of records for formal verification," he said. "We're officially underway." Months passed as the county completed its careful review of the recovered records. Linda learned that meaningful work rarely happened quickly, and she never complained about the pace. Every verified document represented another piece of history restored with accuracy instead of assumption. Daniel regularly updated the families waiting for decisions, explaining each legal step with patience. One by one, official notices began arriving at the gas station. Some confirmed corrected property boundaries. Others recognized long-overlooked water right agreements that had remained supported by Robert's original records all along. Each letter brought quiet celebration rather than excitement. The victories belonged to the families, not to Linda. Still, seeing their relief reminded her why her great-uncle had devoted so much of his life to protecting the archive. One afternoon, the elderly rancher who had first visited returned carrying a small wooden box. "My grandchildren wanted you to have this," he said. Inside rested a hand-carved desert flower made from mesquite wood. "Our family almost gave up believing the truth would ever matter," he said. "Now they'll grow up knowing it did." Linda accepted the gift with gratitude. "Your grandfather never stopped believing. Neither did my uncle." Similar moments followed throughout the season. A widow learned that long-forgotten paperwork confirmed her family's legal access to a shared well. Siblings who had inherited disputed land finally received documentation resolving questions that had lingered for decades. Every success strengthened the community's confidence in the careful process Robert had begun years earlier. Jake often stood back and watched visitors leave the station smiling. "Funny," he said one evening while repairing a porch railing. "People used to stop here only for gasoline." Linda laughed softly. "Now they stop here for answers." The old building itself continued to change. Fresh paint replaced the faded exterior. Broken windows gave way to new glass. The roof no longer leaked, and the workshop became clean and organized. Jake refused to let the place lose its simple character, carefully preserving Robert's old workbench and the weathered station sign that had greeted travelers for generations. Mia transformed one corner of the office into a welcoming space where families could review records comfortably. Shelves once crowded with dusty supplies now displayed carefully labeled copies of historical maps, while the original documents remained safely protected below. One afternoon, Evelyn Brooks visited, carrying a faded photograph she had recently discovered. It showed Robert standing beside the gas station decades earlier, smiling beside a young Linda during her childhood visit. Evelyn handed it to her. "He always kept this one close." Linda studied the picture for a long time. She barely remembered that summer afternoon. Yet Robert had preserved the memory all those years. "I wish I'd known him better," she admitted. Evelyn smiled gently. "I think you're getting to know him now." As the county completed additional reviews, Daniel estimated that the preserved records had helped resolve matters affecting numerous local families. More important than any financial value was the certainty the documents provided. Questions that had remained unanswered for generations finally rested on verified evidence rather than fading memories. One evening, the small community gathered outside the restored gas station for a simple potluck dinner organized by Mia and Jenk. There were no speeches planned, only neighbors sharing food beneath the wide Arizona sky. Still, several people quietly thanked Linda for refusing to sell the property before discovering what Robert had left behind. Frank Dawson raised a paper cup with a smile. "Robert always believed the right person would come along." Linda shook her head modestly. "He did the hard part. I only finished what he started." After the gathering ended and the last vehicles disappeared down the highway, Linda remained sitting on the front porch with Mia and Jake. The desert air had cooled, and the station lights glowed softly against the evening darkness. Mia looked toward the building. "Have you decided?" Linda smiled. "About selling it?" Mia nodded. "You could probably receive a good offer now." Linda looked across the familiar property, then toward the workshop, the office, and finally the storage building that concealed the underground archive Robert had trusted her to protect. She thought about the families who had walked through those doors, carrying hope after years of uncertainty. She thought about Robert's letter and the promise hidden inside it. At last, she answered, "I'm not selling." Jake smiled knowingly. "I was hoping you'd say that." Linda looked at the old station with quiet affection. It had arrived in her life when she believed everything valuable had been taken away. Instead, it had given her a purpose she never expected to find. As the stars slowly appeared above the desert, she realized that losing her career had led her to the work that mattered most. Tomorrow she would tell the town exactly what she planned to do with the place Robert had entrusted to her. The following Saturday morning, neighbors from Dry Mesa and the surrounding ranches gathered outside the restored gas station after receiving handwritten invitations from Linda. The desert sky stretched clear above them, and the freshly painted station sign welcomed travelers once again. The old building looked much as it had years before, only brighter, cleaner, and filled with purpose. Jake stood near the entrance greeting visitors while Mia arranged refreshments inside. Daniel and Evelyn arrived together carrying several framed historical maps that had been carefully reproduced from the original records. Frank Dawson leaned comfortably on his cane, smiling as he looked around the property Robert had loved for so many years. When everyone had settled, Linda stepped onto the small wooden porch. She looked across the familiar faces before speaking. "A few months ago," she began, "I came here believing this gas station was simply an unexpected inheritance that I would probably sell. I had just lost the career I thought defined my life, and I couldn't imagine beginning again at 58. She paused briefly. "Then I found something far more valuable than property." She spoke about Robert's dedication, the underground archive, and the years he had quietly spent protecting documents that belonged to the community rather than to himself. She thanked Daniel for guiding every legal step, Jake for restoring both the station and her confidence, Mia for choosing to stand beside her, Evelyn for preserving Robert's memory, and Frank for keeping his promise until family arrived. Finally, she smiled at the gathering. "I've made my decision. This station isn't for sale." Warm applause spread through the crowd. Linda continued. Instead, this building will remain open as a place where travelers can stop, neighbors can gather, and local history can be preserved. The office will serve as a community archive where verified copies of important historical records can be safely stored and studied. The original documents will continue to be protected exactly as the law requires. What Robert began will not be forgotten. Daniel stepped forward and formally announced that the legal transfer and preservation agreements had been completed. The recovered records had already helped restore numerous verified property and water right claims, and copies would remain available for future reference through the archive. Your uncle's work, he said, will continue helping people for generations. The remainder of the day felt more like a reunion than a ceremony. Families walked through the restored station sharing memories of Robert, studying historical photographs, and thanking Linda for carrying forward his legacy. Children gathered around the old fuel pumps, while Jake explained how they had worked decades earlier. Evelyn carefully arranged framed photographs along one wall beside copies of historic maps. Frank spent much of the afternoon telling stories about travelers Robert had helped during desert storms and long summers when stranded motorists had nowhere else to turn. As the sun drifted westward, the gathering slowly came to an end. Before leaving, Evelyn handed Linda one final wrapped package. "Robert wanted you to have this someday," she said softly. Inside was the childhood photograph Linda had already seen, now professionally restored and placed inside a simple wooden frame. Tucked behind it rested one final handwritten note in Robert's careful script. "The greatest inheritance is never what we hide beneath the ground. It is the truth we preserve until someone is ready to bring it into the light." Linda held the note quietly for several moments before placing it back inside the frame. Later that evening, after the last visitors had departed, she walked through the peaceful station with Mia and Jake. The office shelves now held neatly organized historical displays alongside working files. The workshop had become clean and functional once more. Outside, travelers occasionally stopped for fuel and conversation, just as they had during Robert's lifetime. "It feels different," Mia said. "It feels like it belongs here." Linda smiled. "I think it always did." Together, they walked to the storage building where the hidden hatch remained securely locked. Linda unlocked it one final time that evening and descended alone into the underground archive. The rows of carefully labeled boxes stood exactly where Robert had left them. Yet the room no longer felt like a secret. It felt like a promise fulfilled. She checked the climate controls, ensured every shelf remained secure, and closed the document cases containing the original records. Before leaving, she rested her hand on one of the shelves. "Thank you," she whispered. "I understand now." She climbed the stairs, switched off the lights, and carefully closed the heavy steel hatch. The lock clicked gently into place. Not to hide the truth again, but to protect it properly for the future. Outside, the desert sunset spread across the horizon in brilliant shades of gold and crimson. The newly restored station sign glowed warmly beside the highway, welcoming strangers and neighbors alike. Jake was waiting on the porch with 2 cups of coffee while Mia locked the office for the evening. Linda joined them, accepting the warm cup with a grateful smile. None of them spoke for a while. They simply watched the last light settle across the quiet desert. Months earlier, Linda had believed losing her job meant the most meaningful chapter of her life was over. Instead, it had led her to a forgotten gas station, a hidden room sealed beneath the earth for 40 years, and a legacy built not on money, but on honesty, patience, and responsibility. She had inherited more than land. She had inherited the opportunity to restore truth where time had nearly erased it, as darkness gently settled over Dry Mesa. Linda looked at the station that had become both a home and a purpose. The underground room would always remain beneath the desert, but its greatest treasure no longer rested inside locked boxes. It lived in every family whose history had been restored, every neighbor brought together by the search for truth, and every traveler who stopped beneath the old sign without realizing that the strongest foundation of the little gas station had never been its concrete floor. It had always been the quiet integrity of one man, faithfully carried forward by one woman who discovered that sometimes life's greatest beginning arrives disguised as its most painful ending.